Welcome everyone to our third cafe webinar of the 2023 spring season and our final cultural access forum and exchange at Artreach. Yes, my friends, we are sunsetting this program, but starting a new one. So today we're going to do a little flippity doo. My name is Katie Sampson. I am a cis white disabled woman, and I'm really excited to be joined by my colleagues at Artreach who are going to go around and also introduce themselves.
I am Julian Harper. I am a black man with some black frame glasses. I am the communications director here at Outreach. Um, yeah, I go by he, him. I don't know. I'm all the identifiers. But yeah, why don't someone else take it? Yeah.
Okay, hi everyone. My name is Alasia Destine DeFries. I am the program coordinator here at Artreach. I am a young black woman with very short hair that I've buzzed myself, and I too wear glasses. And yeah, I'm gonna hand it off to one Danny Rose.
Hi, I'm Danny Rose. I am a fab, white, queer, neurodivergent, and the managing director at Artreach. I am a brunette with freckles. I think that's my most notable feature. And I'm really excited to talk with everyone today.
So, because we are launching our new program and podcast, Art is a Tool, I'm going to now pass the mic to Julian Harper.
Hello everyone. I am going to be the host of said podcast, Art of the Tool. Yeah, we wanted to introduce everyone to this new format that we have. We recently saw the Netflix documentary called Working What We Do All Day, and we felt like it touched on so many interesting topics surrounding labor and care and disability that it merited a conversation. So that brings us here today for our inaugural episode, a reflection on care, labor, and disability, a conversation on Netflix's Working What We Do All Day. As described by Netflix, the Working series, was inspired by a classic 1974 nonfiction work called Working. People talk about what they do all day and how they feel about what they do, by Pulitzer Prize winning writer Studs Terkel. Told through oral history, it chronicled over 100 everyday Americans of the era, their jobs, and how employment impacted their lives. In the nearly 50 years since it was published, Americans have faced explosive changes in the way they work, all in the face of increasing inequality. Working applies the spirit of Turkle's book to contemporary times, focusing on three different industries: home care, tech, and hospitality, and shares the stories of 12 people representing the breadth of experiences therein. Within the show, there is a line connecting the economic, political, and social circumstances that entangle disability and labor. Within the first episode, entitled Service Jobs, we are introduced to the crucial folks completing home care work and given an extraordinary look into the entire structure of this specific organization, Mississippi, the At Home Care Solutions Inc. organization. But even within the other industries highlighted, there are demonstrations of how structural barriers come in varied forms. And I would also like to note the solutions and intricacies of the lives of the workers therein. So with that, I'd like to kind of open up the conversation the about the show, and I kind of want to get people's initial thoughts. We really haven't even talked about it at all yet. So, as a group,
I don't mind kicking off. I think one of my favorite things about watching the show was the construct. So first episode we start with the sort of lower level workers within the organization, and each episode we sort of move up the hierarchical ladder until we end up with the CEOs. So in the exact same companies, what does your minimum wage worker look like, and then what does your CEO look like, and then what are the people in between? And so I thought that construct was so interesting. It would have been less interesting for me if it was different companies or imagining different scenarios, but instead, little was left to the imagination because I got to see all of the facets of that organization, and then, you know, all of the different outside factors that impact whatever that whatever level you're on, you know. So in some cases the CEO is sort of on par living style with the service workers in that same organization. And then in some cases the CEO is living lavish while everyone else is fighting for enough money to feed their families. So I thought it was really interesting to investigate that within the same organization, to really get a deep look, even if I don't work in those industries, just like how that works within our country, our capitalist constructs, our government, etc.
And I think something that was really interesting, because we are seeing these same businesses, as you said, Danny, is that when we're looking at one level of class amongst those different businesses, those lifestyles still aren't necessarily the same, which I've always thought was really interesting when we consider what is the middle class in America. And I think that the show does a really good job of showing the origin of the middle class and what it is today, and showing that it's so vast. While watching this show, I texted some of my friends and I was like, guys, are we in the middle class? What do you think? Like, are we, you know, in the middle of the middle class, on the lower end of the middle class? What exactly is the middle class today? And again, like Danny said, while there's not a lot left to the imagination, I definitely do still have questions of how people identify in their different roles. When do people consider themselves as the middle class? Because I do think that that, you know, internal identification at times is more important than seeing what a statistic says, where it's like, okay, if you make this much to this much in the United States in the year 2023, then you are middle class. And it's more, how comfortable do you feel sometimes? How comfortable is your lifestyle? What are you able to do? Do you feel as though a major change in your lifestyle, you know, or in your job, if you lost that job, do you still feel like you would be able to have a kind of comfortable lifestyle moving forward? Would you still be middle class? Things like that. So really opened up my mind to just kind of questioning where I fall, as well as looking at the differences in the lives between the people who, in the episode that showcase those middle class workers, that middle of America, they still all have pretty different lives, different, you know, backgrounds, different households. And then, of course, that comes down to where they are. The value of a dollar is not the same in one place versus another. So that was also fascinating to know that, you know, at the Mississippi care home, the starting salary there was about $9 for their service workers. And so considering that, knowing that at a very fancy hotel in, I believe it was in New York, across from Central Park, their starting salary was $15, which makes sense if you're living in New York. But even then, is that enough to really live in New York? I have to wonder.
That's a good question.
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting the way this thread or through line throughout all of the workers had a slant of identifying or recognizing self-worth within each category. So thinking about how the individuals that were depicted ended up in their line of work, whether it was due to fulfillment or necessity, and how some, you know, may have been perhaps like a stay-at-home mom, but then the husband passed away and the wife needed to find work and really in order to survive, or the way in which the first, I believe, home care worker that we saw that was just starting out and looking for that fulfillment of the new profession, but also reconciling with caring for a child and how much money was being devoted to childcare versus an hourly rate wage. And what was so interesting to me is the conversation that talked about longevity and how long one could see themselves in that role as a worker, or I guess even the survivability of like your body in some of those maybe more labor intensive positions. um, and we're always talking about at Outreach this idea that you can wake up tomorrow and have a disability, like you just don't really know when it's going to come, and what type of protections that people have or put on themselves, and how that can really different it can be different depending on region, but it also can be different depending on background and upbringing. uh, for example, I think one of the workers we saw was really determined to buy a house, and yet there wasn't really a conversation about that happening with some of the other workers at that same level or at that same scale. And so the value of things like home ownership and what that what that means to a white middle class man that wants to settle down, raise a family, and the pressures that he feels in that particular role versus a single mom, or even perhaps an older adult who's married and kind of waiting for retirement. But what was so interesting to me is in each example and in each job that we focused on, there was meaning that they could pull out from that. And I'm not necessarily sure if there wasn't a camera in front of them and an expose on the topic, they would have been able to scratch underneath the surface of why they're doing what they're doing and if it's important to them. And yet they were able to drive importance, which sort of makes you wonder, like, do we all need to be a little bit more self-reflective in the work that we're doing, to make meaning out of work?
I think that's a really great point, Katie. I was thinking about that a lot, actually, because two of the organizations that we follow are luxury things. Self-driving cars, luxury. Hotel, luxury. At-home care service, not luxury. Life-saving care. And when you look at, as Alicia said, the pay rates across all of those companies, the one that is life-saving, not luxury, is paid least. Mostly because it's paid out of the government. So, like, think about that for a minute. Right. And then also just thinking about, like, the sort of sociogeographic point that I think you were making about the home ownership aspect, okay? That Caucasian middle class person was living at home with their parents, and that in their culture was unacceptable. He needed to get out and get his own house and support himself because he had a good job and he had a good life. But in the next scene, we see that same at-home care CEO who's living with her whole family, multiple generations, and they're caring for each other's children, and they're sort of making a culture of support within their family. And no one's saying to them, go buy a house, go build your business, go whatever. She says to them, go be productive citizens. And that made me stop. Like, what is that? What does a productive citizen mean? This woman who runs a life-saving care organization probably knows a lot about that, what it means to be a productive citizen. Is this self-driving car computer programmer a productive citizen? Or does he feel that home ownership makes him a productive citizen? Like, what is it that gets, so that sort of juxtaposition between all of the different groups was really, really interesting to me. and then where they were located, Mississippi versus Pittsburgh versus New York, and as you said, the cost of living in those locations. But it just like took me immediately back that the self-driving car organization is sponsored by sponsorships. The hotel is paid for with luxury, in the luxury economy. And then there's these home care workers who are paid least. Their CEO is paid least, keeps their salary at a certain place so that the actual service workers can get as much as they can get. They don't compensate for travel. They don't compensate for gas. They don't compensate for groceries. They don't compensate for childcare. There are limited benefits. You're not a salaried worker. You're an hourly worker. There's no union because you're paid for by the government. So you have to follow all of these regulations and these rules. And all of that keeps them held in this poverty that is somehow okay because they can live the life that they're happy with and be productive citizens. Whereas that's not acceptable for our friend in Pittsburgh. It's very different for our friends in New York who have this union, can advocate for benefits and a lifestyle that they're happy with. Just thought about that juxtaposition of like luxury versus life saving and how we fund it.
Yeah, definitely. Like, so that the individual he is a data manager from Aurora Innovation, who is also a freelance music producer. Luke is his name, and yeah, it was really fascinating even to like see in conversation with his family that like, the obligatory conversation you have with like your dad or your mom about the value of the home that they bought and like the comparative like value of the home that this individual was looking at and the price that he was talking about. Like, I think the difference being like double.
Yeah, the quote in the show is, your house used to cost double your yearly salary.
Yeah.
And now it's 6 times your yearly salary.
And also like I think, kind of underlining that is like what is what's the actual comparative value of that home too, that like, before like you're building that like equity and like that might not actually be true in a lot of ways, or like and so I felt like there was an interesting strain even in terms of like the understanding of what creates stability, that even seeing as families like I remember them in the conversation like they'll figure it out like we did, like we figured it out, though kind of underlining that is the the obvious difference in the social political structure that people lived in. I mean, which I think is an interesting part of the entire series. It's funny, we got this light in our office going off, but
We're so very still.
speaking of structures, but we like the whole something that we hadn't mentioned before, that this the show is produced by the Obamas, and so there's this whole other whatever you feel about like that, but the show is produced again with this other subtext about the relationship of like class and power and influence, and I think for good and for bad, and I think that like it's really kind of interesting to think like we were talking about the difference in like the way that like the structures that have like created these de facto value for these different industries. Where does that value come from, or where does like I don't know. So those were some of my initial thoughts. I'm always all over the place, but yeah.
I want to go back though, because you did introduce the producers being the Obamas, and just on a very basic level, to me, it was like I had this sort of question coming out of it, like, is former President Barack Obama the next Fred Rogers of the next decade or however, because there was it was just nice to see him. And Danny, you and I
know. I
talked
was gonna
about
say.
this.
I think I told you I cried.
It's like there he is, and
It's like his voice,
Yeah.
his presence. I just like openly wept. It was so like good to see him. I don't know, but like then there were moments where he's just walking through the grocery store, pushing this woman's, grocery cart, minding her children, picking them up, talking to them, like being human. It was like, it made me weep. I don't know.
yeah, and it kind of made me reflect back on the aughts decades of, how the representation of him through various lenses of the media just, took a lot of his personality out of the equation, and the fact that he's really able to relate, because I think he came from a place where, he talks about his first job at Baskin-Robbins and what that experience was like for him, and his grandparents, and what their jobs were like. And so I think there's that aspect of, for lack of a better term, this like a meritocracy of it all, that he still very much believes that you work hard and you can get to a place where you can get a leg up, and then get to another place where then you can get another leg up. And so for someone that is trying to, I think, push, and some might view as a very much like a liberal agenda, or being a Democratic, or a Democrat president, and then coming at and looking at what he's been able to, or the Obamas have been able to showcase on the Netflix platform already, is representation of the disability rights movement, of talking about labor, class, and working conditions. And then also, we've got, I'm trying to think of the one that's a little bit like the Muppets, but it's not. Mochi and...
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
The one about
Waffle.
nutrition.
Waffle and Mochi.
Waffle mochi, yeah.
Which
Waffles?
I absolutely love and could
So cute.
watch like over and over and over again. But I just I think it's really interesting to sort of be in this moment where we're starting to see this shift, and that also where they, as former leaders of the free world, are positioning themselves in the edutainment industry, in a way that has us all thinking and sort of placing ourselves. But also, in the back of my mind, I'm like, what was Obama pushing that we're now, in his presidency, or could not get passed through in his presidency, that we're now seeing try to take shape in these forms, in a way that's digestible, accessible, and pretty much readily available. I don't know anybody who doesn't really subscribe to Netflix, and if they take a pause here and there, but I think it's one of those things to see that platform and how he's able to, or they. I keep saying him because he was in the series and not Michelle, but you know what I mean.
We know who the boss is. Yeah.
Yeah.
I just wanted to kind of piggyback on. I think maybe one thing in terms of I thought what was amazing about the series is that it laid bare a political system that I don't think I would have ever been able to see, like this lobbyist.
Okay.
Oh, right.
And-
Here, let me get my notes, Julian. I have a lot to...
And first of all, I was like what? It was a little bit freaky for me to see how not complicated the process was of them the whole apparatus is complicated in terms of our government, but in terms of them eating together and building a relationship and then asking
Playing golf.
and then asking for lobbying and I think that as an American citizen, you aren't necessarily you're not really given an education in like schmoozing and making government deals, and so I feel like all that feels really opaque and scary, and we already feel really separated from all of our leaders that are elected, and it was really fascinating to see this. And I think also seeing it in relationship with Jeanette, the CEO of the Home Care Solutions organization, especially them being such an alternative kind of CEO, that I also felt like was a really, I think, an obvious political statement that the Obamas were making, about like why highlight this one in particular, and how their structure kind of functions. And so, yeah, maybe we could talk a little bit about that whole process.
Yeah, just to put it into context. So the CEO of At Home Care Solutions was not the top person that we saw in this hierarchy of like starting with the service workers and moving your way up the hierarchical ladder. The top of the company was actually this lobbyist. So the highest paid person at Home Care Solutions is a former senator whose responsibility it is to go advocate for greater attention to what Medicare, Medicaid is able to give to this organization in order to pay their workers. So the sort of through line of that that we follow over the course of several episodes is like, we meet the incoming new service worker. We're told all of the responsibilities that she has to accomplish and how many hours she has to accomplish them, and that she's only paid $9 an hour. There are no benefits, no compensation for travel, et cetera, et cetera. Next episode, we see like sort of how the supervision of all those workers go, and the workers have a meeting where they advocate for a greater wage and maybe some support for travel, because they had to continue working through the pandemic. They were not offered any hazard pay. They are very aware of how critical their role is to the lives of the individuals for whom they work, and they're in this meeting sort of identifying how difficult it is to self-advocate for higher wages. Oh, that's the streets of Philadelphia that you can hear in the background right there. Anyway, so you sort of see this meeting where they're trying to advocate for better wages because they were denied hazard pay, they're denied all these benefits, etc. And then you see the CEO who identifies that she takes what I would consider low-level living wage for her salary as CEO in order to make sure that there's some sort of equality within the organization. So this top paid worker that we meet then is the lobbyist, this former senator, who is going out to see if there is a way to convince the folks that make decisions about things like Medicare to continue support for at-home care solutions, and that way they can increase the wages that they pay their workers. So like, being a worker, I never, like, it doesn't necessarily occur to me if I go into a meeting with my boss and I'm like, hello, boss, I would like a raise. Like, in my life, my boss doesn't then go to a lobbyist who then advocates for a salary increase from the government. Like, that's not my world. So I thought that was like really interesting. And then I thought about what that means for any position that's paid out with government spending or Medicare or Medicaid, et cetera. And so like, what are those, it made me go like, who else is advocating? What are they paid? If we could solve the dichotomy between at-home care solutions and Aurora, the tech company, and what they were all paid, if that tech company wanted to hire a lobbyist to advance their initiatives, they have a lot more resources, a lot more funding. That person is going to be able to scream louder with the resources that they have about their issues, and that's going to drown out perhaps the voice of this person that's advocating for critical care workers to receive the pay that they deserve, right? I just thought that was so interesting, the highest paid worker in that organization being the lobbyist, and that's how any sort of shift in salary is going to be able to occur. Like, just like appealing to the government for a worker's raise just seemed so strange to me, but like, it's pretty clear that that's how that works.
Yeah.
There's a little bit of cynicism that like kind of frames this more, just based on experience of working with caregivers for, the past 20 some years of being disabled, and recognizing that I think I got to a point where I couldn't see myself supporting a system that wasn't supporting its workers, and it felt so icky to me that it was how could I work with, my family savings, fundraising, like any sort of means to get out of a system that is so flawed. And I feel pretty fortunate that I live in a state like Pennsylvania that has the Medicaid expansion. There's a waiver program so people can opt into home care assistance that the state will actually cover, a certain percentage of my home care. But at the same level, I still feel like I have to support my caregivers with a stipend because they're not paid enough. And so that comes out of my salary as an employee in a nonprofit to say, okay, I'm going to give each of my caregivers that maybe works 35, 40 hours a week for my care, supplement it however best I can, because I still think the system is so flawed. Not everybody can do that. And I also think it's not a perfect solution because I'm not going to my state senators every day or advocating that the system needs to change. And the cynicism I start to feel is that those in politics also recognize that that person at home who can't drive and can't go to the store to get their basic needs is probably not getting in a car to go vote as well. And so weighing the effort that it's going to take to lobby for their needs versus perhaps the effort it's going to take for the needs to lobby for a self-driving car, where there's going to be some young voters who are going to get in a self-driving car to take them to the polls. So am I being too cynical and looking at it through that lens? Probably not, but I don't want to see a future where that is the equation that's like laid out just plain and simple. But yeah.
I dare say I'm even more cynical than you, Katie. Dare I say. And the reason I say this is because once my mind enters into the world of thinking about like the political action that's behind this and the policymakers and everything, at times I was just like, too, Obama. Like, I was like, because I know that there are things that he did. Like, I'm like, this is true. And when I saw him, I also got excited. And I was like, I love to hear his voice. I texted my mom and said, he still looks great. He's a very attractive man.
That is great.
And she was like sending gifts back of Obama, being like, I love him. And I'm like, same girl. But at the same time, it's hard to grapple with having a former president be a host of a show about capitalism when, like, it's almost jarring at times to see him, making food deliveries to people in the office, which I would be very excited if Obama walked in right now and was like, did I get your order right? Because that would be wild.
So cute.
Which, that's the thing. I was like, this is so cute. And then at the same time, I'm like, but you're such a smart man. You know the intricacies of, like, what is wrong with the system. And I cannot blame him alone for things that could not get done during his time as president, because, as we know, the system there's a lot going on there, and there are a lot of things that you cannot do alone as president. I mean, you learn pretty early on in your education about checks and balances, and then you're like, well, why are we checking and balancing things like people not receiving health care or water or, things that people need to live? And so the cynic in me is so happy that a show like this can exist so that we can have these conversations and talk about what changes need to be done, what policies need to be changed. But then you see something like The Lobbyist, and it's just like, who might be fighting for something good, but it's just so disappointing to me and makes me so sad when I have to see that this is really how things get done. And I think about the number of activists in the world who are on the ground doing a lot of this work while also being those oftentimes, you know, service workers or people who are in the lower middle class. And so when I think of someone like Carmen, that woman who has dreams to be a makeup artist, and, you know, the ideal situation, she said, would be doing that for celebrities, movie stars, etc. When I think about the fact that she had a dental degree and just simply couldn't be standing for those long hours, and that she was, you know, then essentially fired from whatever job because she couldn't stand for those long hours, which is a story you hear time and time again. I have a friend who was working in a bike shop and got into, you guessed it, a biking accident and was fired, and he was the manager of a bike shop. So they won't take him back, and he's in this awful place where, like, that was his career. It was something he loved to do, and now the place that he had made his living won't have him anymore because of his injury, as though he couldn't just do something else at the bike shop. So it's things like that where I'm like, it blows my mind that, you know, these politicians are well versed enough, they know what is going on enough, and at times for their own presidential campaigns they have to be on the ground showing that they know what's going on to, you know, enforce whatever their platform is. But then at the same time, I wonder what goes on behind those closed doors, where we get to the point where we can have a show like this and still see all of this inequity and still see people who have these dreams, but you can only have a dream, it seems, if you're able to do the basic level of survival. So, like, because Carmen, you know, had that injury and is now doing a variety of different jobs, she can actually follow this dream that maybe she had before she had, you know, decided to get into dental work. Whereas Luke, the Aurora, you know, data guy, he is working to supplement his dream already, whereas Carmen is working to survive after she's already, you know, gone to school for this thing. And I don't remember if she had said anything about any student debt or student loan or anything like that, but she did, because I know someone did. Someone had said that she had a job that was paying well, and she was able to, you know, pay off all of her student debt, which was amazing. But it's things like that where it's like, yeah, you can only really have your dream if you get past the basic level of needing to survive. And I'm like, politicians know this. And it just, that's what makes me so cynical. And I'm like, Obama, I love you, but I'm still mad at you, even though I shouldn't be that mad at you. But I'm like, a politician is a politician. And so I think people my age are always grappling with that of, like, looking up to them, but also being like, you know, mad at them in a never meet your heroes kind of way.
I mean, I would, like, looking at reviews for the show is interesting. I think that one of the main thing that people bring up in terms of maybe like a potential kind of interesting relationship is like the Obama's administration and their specific relationship to tech companies, that they were in power at the height of tech optimism. And that a lot of what has happened today is a direct result of the kind of relationships that they were building together. That and I think in some ways that can be kind of difficult to see. That, like, I think there's also maybe a case to be made that that the way that these industries could prioritize, like, they could prioritize home care. Like, that could be, like, the time and attention spent.
Yeah, but it's not sexy. Like, that's the thing. It's like new tech. That's exciting.
Yeah.
That's something we can get behind.
Make
But, like,
home care sexy.
how do we do that?
How do we make home care sexy?
Or valued, I guess, is like the real thing. And like, we only value things that are flash, and like usually flash and trash. Right? So like, how do we as a society turn our attention toward valuing things like healthcare, direct service workers?
Yeah,
like,
I mean, you would have thought that after the, you know, along with the pandemic, that we would have understood that as being so crucial and so important.
But
Yeah.
What we
moved
did not
towards
do
that
during this
direction.
pandemic was understand things.
Yeah, like
That's what we did not
frontline
do.
worker. A
my
frontline
God,
worker
yeah.
is someone who has to get up and leave their home and go
Yeah.
take care of somebody in their home.
But there
Right,
was
right,
a
but, like-
moment where that was. There was a moment where that was such a big thing at the very beginning when everyone said, let's think about the frontline workers. Let's think about what health means for everyone. Let's think about the fact that at any moment, given long COVID, you know, you might have a disability you did not have 2 years ago or a year ago or whatever. And there was a brief moment where I really felt that I was not a cynic and that I had a lot of hope for where things were going, because I genuinely believed for a second that all of that uproar that hadn't been, you know, in existence except for a small group of people who were fighting for their own rights, everyone was finally on board with it. And then as time went on, things kind of went away, I guess. And I don't know what else to say about that.
Well,
Yeah.
and the
go
one
ahead.
thing that I will say that, you know, the idea that for so many seniors or people in disabilities that were living in care communities, care homes, the amount of isolation and almost like prison-like institutionalization that they faced by not being able to go to the cafeteria, or they couldn't see their family members, has made a huge shift in this idea of like aging in place, staying home, or even multiple people moving in together, or like care communities in that sense, and seeing programs like day habs that we work with at Artreach like starting to thrive more and more. So I want to say that fear of living in community with others that are aging has gotten, it's almost had sort of that adverse effect or that flip effect. And so, you know, are we all like hunkering down now and getting back into our homes to the point where we don't really know how to break out of that cycle to the same extent? I think is a little, yeah, it could potentially be problematic, because it's not like everybody lives in a home where you can just knock on the door and go visit too. Yeah.
I mean, it makes me think about like the role of the home care worker is also the role of an individual that lives between different industries, that like they aren't necessarily given the same sort of resources as a medical, like as different medical professionals.
Yes.
Or like they are also like they are lifelines in all of these different aspects of life. Like I remember in the documentary they talked about like, oh, should I be getting groceries for this person? Should I be doing this for this person? I'm like, yes. But also just like I think it is understanding that like the role isn't just like this box of, okay, we help them with these specific things, like they're really a connection to the world.
Yes, yeah.
And that like we haven't really, I think, necessarily professionally made a place for that, and being like, this is such like an amazing, important, valuable, and exciting role that you get to play in this person's life. And I think it would just be interesting to see, like, because they were in the documentary, they talked about how they were not labeled essential workers. They were not given the PPE that they needed. They were
Correct. They had to purchase their own.
that the government said that home care is not important. It's not essential. And that, but what they really said is that we're not going to fund it, even though we understand the value and the crucial nature of this position.
Which
And-
also made them not eligible for things like PPP loans or like any type of payroll protection
Yeah.
for those workers. Yeah.
Yeah, and so it creates this dichotomy where everybody knows that they're crucial. No one's willing to to fund them, and they are also taking on the burden that's created by like financially. They're taking
Right.
on like the health risk burdens of not having, you know, sufficient, like, whether that be like public health preventional things, or just like the connection between like that they're in physical proximity with people who are immunocompromised, or that like they're um, and I think it was just really interesting, I think, in the documentary to see that, like, um, to see that, like, throughout the entire organization, you saw this sort of struggle and frustration, and it was interesting to even see the Jeanette, the CEO, with their family, or with people that they considered family, and how, like, it was a cultural value of taking care
Yes.
of these people, and that, like, imagine if that were like across all of these industries that we were looking at, and like yeah, but it definitely, you can definitely see how the lack of government attention and funding creates that it's subsidized to the labor and financial burden of the individual staff members. But yeah.
I think there's also that component of whether it's HIPAA, privacy, or not wanting to reflect any sort of aspect of vulnerability, that because it's in the home and it's sort of like it's closed off, that you can keep that part of your life private, and therefore you don't have to talk about it. And I remember, you know, going through that as a young person in my 20s, like getting invited to a wedding that was, you know, a destination wedding, and being like, well, if I'm going to go, I'm going to have to take a caregiver, but I don't want my caregiver to be sleeping next to me in the hotel when there's going to be like crazy parties happening, and like seeing all my friends from college and ruckus dance parties and all that sort of stuff. But it's also like, it's a part of my life. And it took me a long time to get on board with the idea. And I think to be comfortable enough to talk about care work as not only essential, but like part of my family, and part of that love and care. And I think those who receive home care, we haven't necessarily gotten to the point where we can voice that in such an open and honest way that I mean, I recently had a very close family friend that underwent like a tremendous amount of difficulty with cancer and surgeries, and was seeking home care, but it was also just done in a way that was like, please share with just your immediate network. And I was like, well, if I'm going to try to get some home care, like, I'm going to cast a wide net. Like, I'll put it on social media. It's like, oh, no, that's a little too much. But, you know, so the idea that we need help, but we're not willing to go that far. And I think that's definitely cultural. I see that a lot in white spaces, especially like middle class white spaces, where sort of like people don't need to know that information. So I think there's layers to the idea of recognizing and putting home care in a place that's so much more visible, and so much more like, my caregiver wears a uniform to work because she's really proud, and I'm like, you don't have to dress like that to come and like get me up at 6:30 in the morning. And she's like, but you know, if I get pulled over for running a red light, and as a black woman, you know, if I'm wearing my, you know, my nursing outfit, then maybe I'll, like, the police officer might think differently of why I'm driving at 5:30 in the morning up, yeah, you know. So I think there's just so many dimensions to it.
And there's like different dimensions of stigma, right? So you have the stigma of, we don't want to see people with disabilities or see people suffering, so we'll keep those people far, far away from view, and then we'll send people to them. Okay, but then there's a stigma of service. That person is also not respected because they're a service worker. And so because they work domestically, right, we definitely undervalue domestic workers, okay? But they work domestically, so that means that there's the stigma of that service. The person who worked in the hotel as a housekeeper, cleaning staff, I'm not sure what she called her role, but she's walking from room to room every single day, and she has this one moment where she says, there's guests that they don't look you in the eye, they don't say good morning, that this human being sharing energy and oxygen with you in the hallway, and you have absolutely no. So like the stigma of service work and how we very easily ignore individuals who are doing service work was like blatantly obvious. And so you match that with the stigma of disability, right? The stigma of wanting to see people with disabilities, like, I don't know, thriving in life, right? And you match those two together. Now you've got a home care worker that services people with disabilities. That's like a double whammy of stigma. That person is probably the most undervalued person that we have in this, well, at least in the example of the documentary, simply because of all of our quote, quote, societal bullshit. Can I say that on the podcast?
Yeah.
All of our societal nonsense. Let's go with that. All of our societal.
I'm not going to bleep you.
Okay. But that goes along with that, right? So this person who has a great job doing something that makes them, the phrase they use is productive citizen. They're the newest worker identified that she wanted to get into this work because she cares about people, and she likes to talk to the elders of her community and gain from their wisdom, and that's not being prioritized in any other way other than the goodness of people's hearts, which is again a stigma. People who do passion work, right, are also undervalued. So like all of those layers just take away from the value of what this person is doing. Again, this critical life work that they're, that just sort of like blew my mind watching it just openly discussed in the documentary as obvious, like the tech industry is valued, this industry not valued.
So what's the solution then? How do you reduce that stigma? Is the show like just a stepping stone, you think, in the right direction, or?
Yeah, what is the phrase you used earlier, Katie? Edutainment?
Edutainment
Yeah.
the answer here? Or?
Alicia, you asked like what as a politician does Obama want out of this moment? And one of the things that I remember him saying a lot during his presidency was, if the American people only knew about the American people. And so like what I love about what they're doing, the Netflix series and all these documentaries, is showing what the actual American people look like and are. You mentioned earlier about Crip Camp, the documentary about disability rights movement. Like they discuss in that film why we don't have a presence of disability in society, or a presence of disability success or thriving lifestyles in society, because there's always this exclusionary factor. And so I feel like by raising awareness, by bringing people's attention to it, you and I both identified not really knowing about the lobbyists, and that's how this policy, or how this, like the solution that they're seeking is through that avenue. So like I am now more informed. And when we are more informed, we get to step forward differently. So I'm absolutely going to look at my voting ballot and find out who on that list is advocating for increases in Medicaid, Medicare, so that service workers are paid a living wage or can thrive in their life. It tunes me in differently, and allows me the opportunity for attending to ideas that might not have occurred to me otherwise.
I think that one of the strengths of the documentary is that in exposing things like, I really love when they explained the difference between being a janitor in the past to a janitor in the present. That like in the past you were probably just you were a company employee. The assumption that you might become higher up in the organization was always available, or was usually available, or and of course asterisk, different prejudice and like but and then to think of like a someone doing service work now, and how you're most likely maybe a temporary worker, maybe you're a contract
third
worker,
party
and,
contractor.
and that, like, I think about a lot of like narratives, especially from CEOs and things like that, where they're like, or narratives that I've been given, like, about like, oh, you can, like, I started from the bottom and I made it to the top, and that's like you'll figure it out. You just gotta, like, if you with a firm handshake and
The bootstraps.
It's the repackaging of the American dream, which we can now get in like the form of Drake lyrics. Started from the bottom.
I would
now
literally,
I'm
that's
here.
soundbiting in
And-
my head right now. Started from the bottom, now we're here.
and like, yeah, I think you're right, Danny, in the way that I can be like, let's think about, like, I think about that like maybe like an Amazon warehouse, like, sure, that's a lot of jobs, but what kind of security does that bring? Like, we saw an example of a lot of like collective, like, coming together. Like, there was the Pierre talked about how the union there was keeping them in work, and that kept people together. It was interesting to see kind of the higher ups there, but I think more importantly, it was like you saw a connection between them as employees that allowed them security, and security came in different forms during the documentary. Security came maybe in terms of family, maybe it came in terms of like I think about the artist from Pittsburgh, like he obviously, I think his family was like a big part of like his support, and or like, I'm thinking about other individuals where the union like existed as that support. And so I think that like a documentary like this helps focus energy on like what is the priority, and what is also like the quality of a job and like the quality of like an economy that you're trying to build, and how better to talk to someone about that. Yeah
I'm so glad you brought that up, because one of my key takeaways from this was like, it's called working, right? And it's supposed to explain what we do with our life all day while we're at our jobs, okay? But every single person and every single story had a different identity of success. And so like what Katie was saying earlier about how somehow we all sort of derive a purpose from our work, we also look to our careers, our jobs, as our metrics of success. If you have a good job, then you can have a good home, and then you can have a good family, and it all starts with the job, right? You go to school so that you can get a good education, so that you can get a good job. And like the metric of success for personal success in all of these stories is shifted entirely to the career. So in cases of like Carmen, where she's doing the gig economy, a very grueling day delivering Uber Eats yielded almost no money, and her confidence, her personal sense of success and failure came from that working moment and not the moments of her life. And so that made me think about, like, if we're spending so much time at work, our identities, our metrics of success, we know our livelihood comes from the result of a paycheck, but we are projecting our own sense of purpose, our own need, our own ideas of what it means to be, happy on our job. And everything about that is controlled by the people above us in that job. And if it's not the people, it's, in the case of at-home care, the government. Mm-hmm. Nothing about that can you control, but that's where you're deriving your sense of worth, self-worth from. And that really made me think, here at Artreach, we are a nonprofit, all working toward what we believe to be our passion, our advocacy. We put a lot of our individual selves in our work. We absolutely derive our success based on what we're doing in the job and on the job. But I also think that what makes a person whole is deriving success outside of that job. And only in certain circumstances did you see that in the documentary. people were mostly or unanimously deriving success and happiness from their career path, or not deriving any success because their career path felt like a failure. And I thought that was really really interesting for us to sort of think about. And then so adding to that, right, what we talked about with Carmen, where she had an injury on the job, so her identity was dentistry, and she went to school and she invested money and she invested time, and she gets injured, and they don't offer her a chair, or they don't offer her the opportunity to move that little chair that the patient is sitting in up and down, right? We have all this adaptive equipment in the dentist office, but we say she has to stand, so now she can't have this job, which good cue on if she pursued any ADA violations on that. I kind of hope she did, but I digress. The adaptation was not offered to her, so now she has to switch her entire career, and she wants to be a makeup artist. Tell me the last time you saw a makeup artist seated. She's definitely going to have to stand. Like, that's so like there's just all of this conflict that happens when we put our need for success, or our need for identity, our need for purpose on the job, which we don't control.
I mean, and in getting close to closing this out, that made me think a lot about, again, thinking about this particular person that they highlighted in the show. Let me get his name again. Luke. I think I was thinking about art a lot, and I was thinking a lot about art and the way that it plays itself between work. Like, most of us come from a space, either we've been surrounded by art, or that we've been involved in art, or we call ourselves artists, and that, like, I think that there's something, and this is me just personally, I just feeling really validated by, like, Luke being like, I'm a data manager, but I'm an artist. I do this thing at this company, but what I really do is I make music. I'm a musician. That's who I am. And that is what brings him life and light. And I think that, us and what we see is that, like, we're really passionate about our separate things, but I think we're all passionate about art in these particular ways, and because we see how art is really flexible in the way that it allows you to experience it, and and I know a lot of people who work just so that they can make art, like, that they work, and like that's like, but I think maybe even in particular, I was just thinking about, like, something that the documentary doesn't talk so much about, and something that we think about a lot, is like how art can be so life affirming, and it allows for autonomy in spaces where, like, especially home care or care in general, like, especially often when individuals are isolated, maybe it's a day program, like, that art can often be this place where you have this utter and total control in sometimes when you just don't, and it's just like, I feel like art is just like sometimes it's in between like what you do and who you are, and like, and I thought that was just kind of a nice moment in the documentary when Obama and this guy was just jamming
in the basement.
He had a charcuterie board down there already for Obama. I loved that.
And
some little mouse planted that.
Because
And you're, like, very aware that Barack Obama has never heard music like that before, and he gave it the best jam he could give it.
That's not true.
Oh, Obama, yeah,
I would
Obama.
say he's got quite a good palate when it comes to music.
Kendrick Lamar came to the White House. Like,
Yeah.
like.
I'm not sure that this person who created music on the documentary is on par with Kendrick Lamar.
No,
but
no, no,
I would say
I'm
not
just- I'm
quite,
just
but I
saying.
just
Just like
love the
synth
encouragement.
beats.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, just,
Yeah.
there was
I'm
like
just-
a little bit of an eyebrow moment before just like fully
It's
committing
like,
to what he was
I love
listening
it.
to.
well,
I mean, I think he gets
yeah.
like loops.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm saying that I think he's down. You know.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely.
He's super down, always down.
But
But maybe was a little surprised by what he heard at first.
yeah, it's getting there. Oh man, what was that? Thank you all for talking about this documentary series, and I think that we did a good job at really highlighting that disabilities and care are a part of our daily lives, and if they aren't, they will be. And that I think that was what was really interesting about the documentary, and it really brought that to light. So I was glad to have this conversation. So thank you all, and hope
you,
that
Julie.
you listeners or watchers or however you're experiencing this tune in again. Thank you.
Thank you.